Felonies and misdemeanors are differentiated by how long you would spend in jail if you are convicted and sentenced. A felony is punishable by a minimum of 1 year. That's more than 365 days in jail. A misdemeanor is punishable by less than 1 year, which is less than 365 days in jail, or 365 days or less. Felonies are generally more severe in nature. Misdemeanors are generally less severe. However, there are a number of felonies that are enhanced felonies that can be relatively minor. For instance, third offense shoplifting. Even if you just shoplifted a small item, $1 or $2 worth of value, that can be a felony. I've defended that case. You would think that's relatively minor, but because it's enhanced, it can be serious. DUIs are another example of how escalating enhancements can turn a case from a misdemeanor into a felony. You could have a relatively low level DUI, 0.08 or 0.1 level BAC, and find yourself, if it's your third or fourth offense, find yourself on the cusp of a felony charge. A lot of people ask whether misdemeanors are less serious than felonies, and they are because of the amount of time that you might spend in prison or jail if you are sentenced to the maximum offense. And certainly on the broad spectrum, they are much less serious than the most serious felonies. But misdemeanors can carry with them serious consequences, including up to a year in jail. Some misdemeanors can carry with them registrations on the sex offender list, of course. Other misdemeanors, you can lose your right to bear arms, and in some misdemeanors, you can lose your right to drive for extended periods of time. So in Nebraska, there's a range of misdemeanors and there's a range of felonies. The range of misdemeanor penalties is as little as a fine. For instance, first offense, possession of marijuana, you're going to get a $300 ticket. You can't go to jail. However, fines can escalate depending on how many possessions you've had, and jail time can go up. The most you can get for a misdemeanor offense would be 1 year in jail. That would be for a serious misdemeanor assault, for instance, where you cause some injuries to somebody. You could do up to a year in jail for something like that. There are a number of other misdemeanor penalties that can be up to a year. On felonies, though, you can be incarcerated for as little as 0 days and as much as the rest of your life, depending on the seriousness of the felony. Felonies are much more serious than misdemeanors when we talk about penalties. It absolutely matters whether you're charged with a felony or a misdemeanor. When you're charged with a felony, you need to take that very seriously. Even if it seems like a low-level felony, you need to be immediately on the phone with an attorney to determine what your rights and what the consequences that you're dealing with are, even before your first court date. Misdemeanors, while being less serious, can also carry some pretty serious consequences, so it's also important to talk to an attorney right after you find out you're being investigated or charged with a misdemeanor. There are a number of instances where a misdemeanor can turn into a felony. However, if you're charged with a misdemeanor at the beginning, it's less likely for it to be escalated into a felony. I have seen it happen a number of times, though. Typically, it happens when the prosecutor made a decision at the beginning of the case to no charge a felony or to keep a charge as a misdemeanor for negotiation purposes. In other words, a prosecutor might think, you know what, this is this person's first offense. I'm going to charge this crime, which could be charged as a felony, as a misdemeanor, and that's going to be their plea offer. When you speak with an attorney initially, they will communicate to you what your exposure is. Your exposure will be determined by the facts, not by the ticket you received or the charge you received.